Johnson, you want to stay up there? You want to
How's your phone there?
You ready? I'm doing the same thing right there. Okay. Ready to start, okay. Good evening, everyone. So tonight's informational here, public informational meeting we're having is just exactly that. We're going to have the master plan committee recommendations. They're gonna give the information, and then next week, next Wednesday at 7:30, we will open the public hearing. Today, again, it is just for information. We're not taking any questions. The master plan is not taking any questions. This is gonna be just information. And the presentation will be done by Councilman Johnson, who happens to be the chair of the master plan committee. So we're gonna start, and Councilman Johnson, all yours.
Thank you, Supervisor. So yeah, just to follow up on that, the idea is to get printed copies out. It's been out digitally for several weeks. And this gives you a chance to look it over. And if you have any concerns or you have any questions, it gives you time to digest it and understand it and figure things out. So when the hearing starts, you can have your questions in order and concerns and stuff, so we can present them and it'll be on record. So again, this is just to show you what the committee's done to date, and it's certainly not finished. Some of the things we had to address, like the warehouses and stuff, if you remember, we got clobbered with 20+ warehouse applications, and it was something that we had to figure out how to do and move forward. So, it kind of got a little disjointed when we did that. But anyway, this is where we are, and again, this is just so you can see what's been done and where we're going moving forward. And I just want to say, thank you all for coming out. And, even if you're not here, certainly you can reach out to us. We plan on keeping the hearing open for several months. So there's plenty of time for comments, written, in person, or, either way. And it's going to be work sessions and town meetings that will be open both. The, one thing I do want to say is a big thanks to the members of the committee. They work tirelessly on this. It's all volunteer, several meetings a month, plus time in between discussing stuff, visiting sites, and they put a lot of hours in to get to this point. So I just want to say thank you to you guys. Did a great job. So it's much appreciated.
Right, all yours.
So as we start, obviously that's a map of Walk Hill as it exists in our current zoning. Some of the lots, obviously, you'll see have changed with recommendations and stuff, and we'll go over them as to why, and move forward from there. So if you go to the next page, you'll see that this is it's not working. So this is the committee from last time in 2005, and then the current committee. If you look at the last master plan review, this was kind of finalized in 05 and not adopted, I believe, until 09. The idea this time is rather than wait till everything is done and then adopt all the changes at once, kind of address them as we go and be a group of them, which is why we're looking at what we have done to date, and look at these and address these. If we change the code and adopt them, that's done. So when the final master plan review is finished, this part will already have been addressed. There'll still be some to do at the end, obviously, but instead of having it all at once and waiting 4 or 5 years after the plan is presented, because again, zoning changes, things change. That's going to lead to, possible changes and stuff. If you wait 10 or 15 years to do something that you thought was a good idea, then might not be, at that time. So you can run down. I'm not gonna read the names and go over everything, but you know, I mean, it's, Councilman Vanella and myself are both on the board. You know, Carol Gillen is like an amazing person who does a lot of our typing and organizing and putting the maps together, and, you know, she's just a star. Jimmy Lodice, you know, also a good guy, Chris Michaels. Salim Newsom, who's our tech guy, just, you know, figuring out how we can make the slides work, so he's really, really good. You know, chief local business owners, got a lot of experience, history, and, you know, brings to the board. You know, Richard Reed's also a good guy. He's an iron worker from the city. He's a fireman, so he's all about community. And then Denise, you know, she's also on the school board of community. So if you look at the members, you can see that they're well-rounded, and that's good because it brings to the board an experience in all different areas that allow you to pull from and get, you know, a vision that's actually covering all aspects. And that's very similar to the 2005 committee. You know, if you look at those individuals, also from various backgrounds, you know, and they put forth, you know, a plan that was very well done. And then, you know, we're hoping we can do the same thing moving forward. So, see, that works. I got 20 there. So I'm not going to read over the zoning and the purpose for it. You guys can look at that slide. You already know it. The idea of anything is to, you know, keep the town moving forward in such a way that we preserve the character that we all like and all respect, and address any concerns coming, whether that be large development, you know, whether it be housing. Either way, we have to address those. We have to expand. We have to take into account all new stuff, but still keep in mind that, you know, this town board, this committee is looking out for the residents of Walk Hill first, right? Businesses are important, revenue is certainly important, but, you know, the residents can't take a backseat to those. So if you read through it, that's just the purpose of the zoning. The following page shows, no, it's all you, bud. So the following page shows the different zones currently in our code, and they're color coded, so you can look at those colors on the maps. It is kind of difficult, and you have to jump back and forth. I apologize, but it's the best we could put together. And it shows the different zones and where they are. And we also have tables in the back that will show you what's permitted in those zones, special use and actually permitted from the planning board. So you can see those. Moving to the next slide, the committee kind of realized that to move the town forward, we should be forward thinking in recruiting businesses and recruiting stuff that would possibly lead to, you know, jobs for our young people, not just, you know, manufacturing, not just warehouses, but try and get businesses here that, you know, are a star that people can live and work in the same town. So the idea of the coordinator of new business and economic development is to do just that. You know, mainly it's a recruiting position and trying to look down the road and bring positive stuff in. Again, that's a revenue stream. So when you get a large business like that, that would actually pay the salary for this individual as soon as you got 2 or 3 of them in. And every time they bring in a new one moving forward, it's just more money, you know, to use in the revenue that the town needs to do everything, keep that we like. The town engineer, it's also kind of piggyback to that. It's just to try and make things a little more streamlined. And with one meeting, you can get a lot more accomplished and not have to go between multiple boards just to get answers right away. So we felt that, you know, as a committee, these 2 positions would certainly help doing things in a positive way to get revenue in here, businesses to keep the town attractive. The sunset clause was something we actually discussed. That already was in the code. So after we went through it, we went through the code and found this. It just so happens it's not always followed. I don't know if you've noticed, but some projects that are approved 10 or 15 years ago have nothing done to them at all, and then the project moves forward. You know, in 15 years, a lot changes with zoning. So basically what we're thinking is, you know, after you have 3 extensions and your 12-month initial final approval, so after 4 years, you've really not done much in your project. You probably should come back and revisit the zoning, sit down with the planning board. Doesn't mean you're not going to get what you've had. It just means you need to address anything that's changed. You know, there was one project I know that I was involved in here on the zoning board. It was approved in the 70s and it sat with nothing done for all that time. And then they just came in and wanted to build the permits and build houses. The zoning went from, well, there was no zoning then, but the zoning went from 1 acre all the way up to 3 where that was located. So, you know, that was something that should be revisited. So you can read through that. I'm not going to like bore you with the details because it is part of our code. But I do think 4 years is plenty of time after final approval to get something done and move forward. The next page, overlay zones. That is It's tricky because sometimes you need it and it has to exist in the code in some format. But the idea is if it can dramatically change the character of the neighborhood by changing the zoning to allow for a floating zone to apply, it's probably not the best thing to do because the people and residents that already live there now can have their neighborhood completely changed, with one overlay zone. So that was recommendation was to eliminate what's in the code and stuff that needs to stay be addressed in a certain way that kind of limits where it can go, so it won't change neighborhoods. Also, conservation subdivisions, that was a big thing that was happening when we had sprawl, if you remember that. It was to limit, houses from going out and out and out. The idea behind it was if you keep the cluster development in the centralized location, you can limit how much services you need and where things need to go. The problem behind that and what we've seen is there's a permanence to this conservation subdivision area that seems to not exist. Some projects that have the subdivision, the land changes hands 2 or 3 times, and then down the road, there's someone who wants to now develop part of that, right? So the other thing it does is if you're doing a cluster development in an area where the homes are already spread out, it doesn't fit the character of the neighborhood. So the same idea, as the overlay zones, it kind of changes characters, which, people that live there didn't originally sign up for. So the recommendation was to remove that as written in the code. Warehouses and distributions, this was a big one we spent a lot of time on. Our code unfortunately didn't specify really the difference between warehouses and distribution facilities, although in fact they are the same thing. But they were allowed in different zones, like OR zone, office research, allowed distribution facilities, right? Enterprise light allowed warehouses and enterprise allowed warehouses. So you had these zones where you could have these warehouses and potentially if you didn't do anything, you could be faced like, for example, on Baker Road in Circleville, it is all currently OR zone. The problem with OR is it has 100-foot limit on height. So now you can have a 10-story distribution facility in the current zone that's permitted, and it abuts residential neighborhoods, right? So that's probably not the best use of planning. Now, OR was the buzzword the last time this was addressed, 20 years ago. Office research was the up and coming thing, just like, warehousing and e-commerce is now. So you kind of have to plan for the future and it's hard to figure out. But now that there's that much residential, you don't want 100-foot buildings right in there, right? So one of the things we looked at was changing those zones from office research, highway commercial. So they're still used for the similar uses, but you're not going to get anything higher than a 35-foot building. So if you run down these, you jump to the next slide, you can see that we had 3 real zones where we were thinking that warehouses would be okay. And the reason they're there is because of their proximity to the major interchanges. As you get further from the interchange, you're behind truck traffic for longer and longer and longer. That's probably not a good thing that, residents would want to deal with. So the idea is if you keep them at these 3 locations, and there's detailed maps, we'll go through them in a minute, you can limit the truck traffic traveling far from the quickway. So it's off and on quite easily. So it still allows some warehousing, but not to the degree, if you remember, like I started with, we had over 20, I think it was 22 applicants when this board adopted the moratorium. We were facing 22 different applicants of warehouses, which is extreme. So we needed to put the brakes on and figure out the best way to move forward. So the 3 sites is basically exit 116, 119, and 122. The 122 one is unique because there's a road that's supposed to be constructed that basically goes from behind the park and ride back to Goshen Turnpike, and it opens up all that property. Not until that road is constructed could you actually put any warehouses there because there's nothing that's going to change. But once it's done, any lots that have frontage on that road could be used for warehouse construction. The 116 up in our northern border currently is zoned for warehousing and distribution now. There's no rezoning of anything there. In fact, some of the lots we've changed to not allow it to reach out so far. But the idea is, you can get right off the quickway, right on 17K, and then back on again. And again, it doesn't reach very far from the interchange. The exit 119 is kind of tough because on one side it's pretty residential. The other side is currently, well, there's OR on both sides, but currently, allowing for warehousing and distribution facilities. But if you go up from the old like Rich House construction off the Quickway and go up towards 17M, those lots there, which there's not a whole lot, would be allowed for warehouses, but that's it. Once you get up to the red light at the end of 302, there'd be no more. So those are the three locations. One of the other things we looked at too, and this came from actual research, is the warehousing can have a height of up to 60 feet because the new warehouses have automated pickers. So it's not people that are, on a forklift going up and grabbing stuff off the shelves. So this can decrease the footprint and still allow for sufficient square footage of warehousing. So one of the things is to look into possibly raising the height from the 35 to the 60 for those. And if you were in a zone that was originally OR, you're still cutting it down from 100 to 60, so you're not going to 40 feet off. Setbacks, if any warehousing or distribution facility is adjacent to residential, whether it's pre-existing non-conforming residential or residential any capacity, regardless of the zone that it's in, everybody was pretty adamant that there should be a significant setback to limit the effects of the warehousing and truck traffic on the residents that live there. So there's a 100-foot setback. If you look, it's actually, a tree buffer as laid out by our code. So on the next page, all three locations are just mapped out for like a beginning. You can see that the enterprise light, the gray stuff, is no longer warehousing in the first one, right? It's only in the pink. The pink is the enterprise zone. So that's where you would actually have warehousing. If you go to the second one, you can see it's basically from 17, the Quickway or I-86 up to 17M in those zones. And again, none of those zones are changing. They're currently permitted uses there, but we're just trimming some of the edges off and limiting how far out they can go. The third slide over there is basically the new road. So nothing's laid out. It's all just OR. The purple stuff is OR, office research. It's still like that there. And until the road is in, there's not really any place you could lay out for warehouses. So if you can see the three, this is just kind of a rough picture. They're detailed in the next couple of slides. The first one on 17K basically goes from Stone Schoolhouse Road back to 17M. And that's as far as you can get off the I-86 interchange. So let's jump on to the enterprise zones. But if you look here, these maps show current zones within the town that are pretty far out there. You can see off Midway Road on the one map that's currently allowed to have warehousing and distribution facilities. So to change it to, the enterprise light, it's no longer allowed. So you can knock the warehouses out of that zone. Because again, that's very far from an interchange. And then if you come over to this one, these three little zones, it's Goshen Turnpike and 211. So they would go from Enterprise Light back to, or from Enterprise back to Enterprise Light to stop any warehouses from that zone. And then for our drive off of 211 East, there's those three little lots. If you look, you can see them on the map. Those three little lots are currently zoned for warehousing. I don't know why. There's really no way to access them, with truck traffic in an easy way. So those would also be changed. You couldn't have warehouses there. Let me see. I think the Baker Road one and 17N, if you look at the darker color, that was the OR zone. And one of the things about that is both of those lots are pretty much full already. And the other one, the 24-152, is currently a commercial business already. So nothing is really going to change there. And the one lot, the 24-150-22, if you look, it's on both sides of the road. Currently, from the current way it's zoned, one side is OR, the other side is O2, but it's the same lot. So it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to use a roadway divider like that. All right. So highway commercial, some of the changes in that, because there's a lot of areas that should be highway commercial, sales of repair motor vehicles and small engines and stuff, that would be a special use permit, not a permitted, not just a permit, like a permitted use in the zone. So basically would require a public hearing. So any business that was going to do that would have to have a public hearing to move forward. So that just puts another layer in there for protection for everybody to get an idea of what's going on and what can happen. And it's just more checks and balances. Car washes with municipal water and sewer would be added. The mixed use commercial, is not what you would think. It just means if you have a business, a small business in HC, and you wanted to have a residential space upstairs, you can do that. Now, that's not like, you can have a maximum of 2 if you have a really big facility, but that's it. The idea behind that was, and we've got some pictures on the next page, I'll show you. The idea behind that was to allow small businesses starting out, like I know several of the ones in our presentation, the owner actually lives upstairs, and then runs the business downstairs. So they don't have to have a separate mortgage somewhere else and tie their money up. Whatever they can save now, they can put back in the business and build the business and make it, bigger and better moving forward. It also allows, if you have an employee that works for you that needs a place to stay, puts an apartment upstairs. And again, these are small apartments, not like multiple ones. It's 1 on most places. If you have a large place, you might have up to 2. But that offsets the cost that you have to pay for your mortgage, for your site plan, and that leaves you some more money to put back into your business. So the thought behind that is basically to help you expand and move forward. The other thing we had was to remove schools, vocational, regular places of worship, and it's not to limit them and prevent them anywhere, but because they have specific setback requirements from distances of facilities that might be, maybe it's a store, like a gas station with a store that sells alcohol or tobacco, they have a setback that's required. And because these lots are smaller, that kind of limits the uses that could move forward. So by removing them, you would basically take those chains off on what your uses could be and where they could exist. So that was the idea behind it. It's not to limit them, it's not to get rid of them, it's just to stop the conflict between the commercial and those uses. If you look on the next page, there is 4 locations where we actually have this currently existing in town. We have Lakes Deli, Johnson's Truck and Auto, the Gold Station, and Blueberry Mountain, all have residences upstairs above the business. The residences then allow, again, revenue or a place for the people to live. I know Johnson's, the owner actually lives upstairs, so that's how that works. And it's very nicely done, very well set up. The parking is in the back, separate from the business. So, again, the idea is to allow these small businesses the ability to operate and still get a little bit of revenue to move forward. So you can look through those and figure out what's what. It's pretty well explained, but again, and this isn't in our code currently, but these do exist throughout the town. So by putting it in there, it kind of makes these legal. And again, it's only in highway commercial that you would have that. On the next page, you have the town center district. Again, this was looking at the impact of places of worship where you have businesses, because you're not going to have the 2 coincide with the separation distances on a lot of these smaller lots, which is what exists here. The daycares and nurseries and eating and drinking establishments were moved from special use permits just to permitted to, streamline those projects and make them move forward without that 1 extra step. And at the bottom, shopping centers and theaters also would be allowed without that extra step. If you jump to the following page, you can see that, again, we're moving from special permitted uses to permitted uses. That's the daycares and nurseries, eating and drinking establishments. And again, working out the, places of worship being within those zones, because they will limit what can be done, with the setbacks that currently exist. Moving forward, this brings us to warehousing. So in the enterprise zone, only the enterprise, not enterprise light, nothing else, just enterprise is where you would have warehousing and distribution facilities allowed. This is where some of the lot changes had to occur to make them enterprise from enterprise light and so forth. But if you look, you can see that this is where they will be allowed by special permit use from the planning board. And again, we have the places of worship probably should exist where those are, so that would be removed. If you jump 1 more page, you can see that you have kind of the same thing we were just talking about with the bulk tables, so you can see the difference. And again, it's to reduce the impact. It's not to change anything directly. Moving on, you can see this is general code changes. Camps, as written in the code, are allowed in RA and some other places R2. The board, or the committee, felt kind of strongly that camps should be only day camps. So you would remove camps from the code, allow day camps to remain. And again, that's for daytime programs, supervised by recreational, or for recreational activities and stuff for children that are usually home from school, whether it's summer or break or something. Cemeteries, the concern with that was the groundwater contamination. When you have cemeteries, you have a serious concern about contaminating groundwater from all the preservation products that they use for the individuals that are buried there. So basically, currently, it's neighborhood commercial RA, RA1, which is actually a floating zone, R2, and R1. We said, listen, probably shouldn't be like that because there is wells and stuff in those areas. Recommend that any new cemetery that's designed and constructed the lot itself is surrounded by water and sewer on all sides, so you don't have a water quality thing. And burial sites should stay at least 100 feet from the property line to protect the neighbors as well as the people in the cemetery to provide peace. So again, this isn't to limit anything here. It's not to restrict anything we currently have. It's just moving forward to plan in such a way where we don't have a problem down the road. The mobile home parks, originally that was a good idea because it's affordable housing. But if you've noticed or talked to anyone that has a residence in those, the park rent has gotten really, really high. So with a high lot rent and then mortgage on the residence that you're in, it's not really a savings. It's not really affordable housing anymore. Currently, it's in R2 and RA8, which is again that floating zone. But R2, most of that's not serviced by water and sewer. So to have high density housing like in mobile homes and stuff, it's really not going to work. It's not going to fit because you can't provide the services. That would require them to have their own water treatment. It would require them to have their own, septic system that eventually, and we all know this at the town, something happens, owner, whatever moves on, the town ends up taking those over. And then we end up with these little tiny water systems all over that really are not the best way to move forward and takes, get things done in an efficient way. So it was to remove mobile home parks, completely take them out and not have them in the code moving forward. We do have some existing ones and certainly they would continue to exist. It wouldn't be a problem, but nobody would be looking to build new ones down the road. This is tourist homes and lodging. This is pretty much the Airbnbs. This board has already worked on a code to try and address that, keep the Airbnbs and still allow them, but have it happen in a way where it doesn't impact the neighbors if there's a house next to you. So the idea was to keep it in the larger lot sizes, which is pretty much RA. So it stays in the RA zone and it becomes a special use permit by the planning board, so there's again more checks and balances when the project moves forward. But basically that was the idea, the larger lot sizes. This board has something a little more comprehensive together to add to that, but that's legislation that'll go in the code to address the Airbnbs. Some more code changes. So these are specific lot change code changes. Several reasons for some of them. The one, again, we have the OR zone over by the schools on Maple Avenue. That is 100-foot buildings allowed, right? Probably not a good fit to the neighborhoods around there because they are residential right on the other side. So the idea was to take those OR zones, still allow for businesses by making them commercial and let them move forward in that direction. So if you look through this, we have Maples Road, basically all the way up from Highland Avenue to 17. There's lots on there that were changed a while ago from RA to R1. The problem with R1 is you need water and sewer, and there is none there. So that change really doesn't work, and it doesn't fit the neighborhood because the other lots around there are still all RA. So that was one of the changes there. The lots on Ingrassia and Parsons Road, I'll show you on the map. Those are kind of landlocked. You don't really have any access, and for some reason, they would like enterprise. So it would make more sense to make those meet the surrounding lots around them, which is RA. So that was the change there. The California Avenue and County 78, who I just mentioned, that's the OR zone. Probably should go to HC. And then the properties all the way up 17M to the top of the town from like Washington Heights or maybe like 302, that area. If you look at the map, you'll see those lots are smaller and currently enterprise light. And when we look at the bulk tables in the next couple of pages, you'll see that enterprise light requires much larger lots with frontages and setbacks and sides, and you can't really use a lot of those little lots without buying them all and combining them. So to change them to highway commercial, it allows them to still be used, and you'll see in the next couple of slides, that it doesn't really change what can happen there. It just allows for a smaller lot to still be used for commercial zones. And the one positive thing about that is the residential that's right behind it, a much smaller highway commercial use as opposed to much larger industrial use is not, it's not the same when you have neighborhoods right on either side of it. Highway commercial zone is a much friendlier zone to abut residential. So that's the change. So you can see it's the next 10 slides that this change goes with. So the first one, the Maples Road and Highland Avenue, if you look, if my laser pointer would work, it would be a lot easier. The gray down there, this stuff here.
Turn it on.
Talking about changing. You can see it go from that right to the green, which, is RA. So it's a much better use or fit from what's currently there. So I don't know why, again, that doesn't really have access to anything really. It's not just a good spot to fit that in there, but that's the change behind it. And if you jump to the next slide, well, actually, we just move over. Next slide over here, it's the Highland Avenue, this is Gracia Road and Parsons Road. So if you look at the permitted uses, you can see that, well, we changed camps, right, to day camps, but it's still a special use permit. The cemetery will still be allowed as a special use permit. And then if you slide down, the only other real change is the tourist homes and lodging is a special use permit. But you can compare the RA and the RA1 uses, or the R1 uses that would happen there in the change. So again, currently it's not serviced by municipal water and sewer. The R1 density couldn't be supported. And again, it was previously RA, changed to R1. And if you look at the bulk tables, there's no real change in the schematic there. So on the next page, this is in Gracia and Parsons. It's a little landlocked piece. You can see with the arrows in the corners, if you take a look. Those two lots don't really have a usage that would fit. So to move them into RA like the surrounding ones, just makes a lot more sense. And that does conform to surrounding zoning. Again, lacks access for truck traffic with enterprise light uses. So it's just not a good spot to have that zone. Then this is the County Route 78 one. This is the OR zone, look at the two, and it moves it back to highway commercial. And again, that's for the 100-foot requirement on limit on height that you want to address. And a lot of this property is already zoned by the school, or it's already owned by the school district. So either one of those zones doesn't permit schools, so it doesn't really have an effect on them anyway. And with the little undeveloped space remaining to have those huge tall buildings in our zone just doesn't really make sense at this time. Moving on. This is a comparison of the uses. If you look at this page and you run down, you have OR and highway commercial at the top. And if you run down the list, you can see what's permitted and not permitted in special uses. And you see there's not really a huge change in these. The mixed use residential is a new one. That's why the whole thing is highlighted in purple. The other ones are pretty much going from permitted to special use or removed entirely based on what they are. Pretty self-explanatory. If you read through that, you can see them. This is exit 119, right? And 302. So if you look, the lots on both sides of 17 are currently OR, and the OR zone does allow for distribution facilities up to 100 feet in height. It's not really a good setting for that. The board or the committee kind of felt that, that was not the best way to use that property because of the residential that seems to be not too far from behind it. So to still allow for distribution facilities or, things like that, the idea was, again, to move from 17 up to 17M. But on the other side, where you go towards Circleville, is to get rid of that completely, but leave those commercial businesses as highway commercial. So like the Alpine House, CR Wolf, those lots would stay HC, so they're permitted in there and they already are used. The one lot, if you look, which is Alpine House, is on both sides of Baker. It's the same lot, 24-150-22. So to have one zone on one side of the road and a different zone on the other side of the road really doesn't make sense. To have OR on the left and residential on the right for zone isn't your, and it's the same lot, so that's the only reason for the change there. The smaller lot, the 24-152, is currently a commercial business now, it's all steel and aluminum. And they would just be conforming to what's there, and again, CR Wolf and Alpine House is there. So those would be the only changes on that side, moving up. The next page shows you a close-up. The map you can see at the bottom, and it highlights the three little lots I just mentioned to you with the green arrows. And again, using a roadway to break up zones is probably not your best use of planning. One of the things this board did, is we were looking at trying to change some of the zones to allow for businesses out on 211 further. But it was RA, was to go a certain distance back from the main road where the change would occur. And it would happen that way, but it's tough because it's one lot. You really don't want to have half of the zone one way and half zone the other. So it's kind of a balance that you have to put together. But again, you can see that, and again, a 100-foot change is significant. So it's probably better to change that now before it becomes something like that was not really nice to the neighborhood. This is just explaining it forward a little further. You have the all steel and aluminum on lot 24-152, and then the 24-152 is on both sides of the road. So those will be the changes there. On the next page, it just shows this one little tiny lot in the corner is currently zoned enterprise. And I don't know why, it doesn't really have any access. So that little tiny sliver, the recommendation was to move that back to R, I think that's R1, R2, right? So to move it back to R2, just because the surrounding lots are already like that, and why would you have a little commercial sliver where you don't have access to your vehicles? This is the big change from enterprise light to highway commercial. Basically, it goes from Naples Road all the way up to the top of the town line. So this map here, where it's highlighted, is just an overall, so you can see it like looking top to bottom. We had to break it up into some subsections on the map so you can see we did a northern and a southern. And you can see the size of the lots, they're a lot smaller. If you jump to the next page, it's a close-up of the northern part. And you can see the change from enterprise light to highway commercial. With enterprise light being gray and highway commercial being the which color. So those lots, if you look, are quite small. So to use them for a larger design in enterprise is not going to be as good as if they were designed for a smaller lot size that allows a business to still exist. I think if you jump ahead, Larry, 2 pages, you can see the bulk tables. You can see if you look, in enterprise light, right, you have 150-foot width, but in HC, it drops down to 100. The depth goes from 200 down to 100. The front yard goes from 50 down to 35. The rear yard goes from 50 down to 40. The height still stays at 35. So the idea is with those smaller lots, you can't really use them as enterprise light zones because they're just not large enough. If you drop them down to the highway commercial, you can still build something on them commercially and they'll work. Go back 2 slides and jump, please. So this is the northern portion again. You can see the changes on the lots. They're pretty detailed. The next page is the southern portion where you can see those changes too, moving up 17M. And again, it's enterprise light to highway commercial. Let's go to the next one. There's the bulk table, or there's the permitted uses under enterprise light and HC. If you look down those, you can see basically a comparison of what's permitted in one and the other in terms of uses and see how they work. Again, we're adding mixed residential. That's why it's highlighted in purple or pink or whatever that is. And then you have the commercial recreation also is going to be allowed in HC as a special use permit, and car washes. Those are the ones I started with in the beginning for changes. The places of worship were out. And again, that's the setback interference issue. Sales of vehicles, motorcycles, small engines become special use permit, not just permitted. The schools and vocational schools, again, because the setback requirement was out. Repair shops also is moving from permitted to special use permit. Shopping centers, theaters are now just special use permit. And if you look at the bottom, warehouses are no longer allowed in enterprise light. So that would take them out completely. Even if it wasn't changed to highway commercial, you wouldn't have warehouses running all the way up 17 now. And the very last couple of pages, if you just look, is an overall comparison of all the zones and what's permitted uses in those. So you can compare like town center to OR, enterprise light, enterprise, neighborhood commercial, highway commercial, RA, RA1, RA2, R1. So everything is laid out in there, so you can jump through the pages and see what's permitted. And the permitted is the P, and the special use permit is the SUP. So you can just see the differences by looking at it. So that's pretty much it that we have to this point in time. This is the recommendations as of May 6th of this year. And again, there's a lot more work to do. It takes time to do all this, certainly. But again, a big thank you to the board for all their hard work and time put in. And if you guys have questions or have time to look this over, you have concerns and stuff, like you heard the supervisor say, next Wednesday, we'll do the public hearing and start it. And we're going to keep it open for several months, because the more input we get from more people, right, the better the final project will be. So there's, no need to hurry anything, there's no need to rush. You want to hear from everyone, you want to think of things that you might have overlooked. The more brains you have together, the better it'll be. So please take this home, look at it online. If you have questions or concerns, up until then, and you want to reach out to myself or, Mr. Vanilla, we're both councilmen, so we can certainly talk right to you. But, things will be on record starting next week when we do the public hearing. And I'm sure you can reach out to your other councilmen or the supervisor too. We'll all help in any way that we can, get stuff figured out so you can have your questions, concerns and stuff addressed in such a way that, you're satisfied, you're happy. Maybe we missed something, maybe we should look at this. And that's the idea behind it. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Wow, thank you.
Good job, Eric.
Great job. I would like to thank the Master Plan Committee, job well done, to go over this and create this. Fantastic. Now it's out. Hopefully we can stop all the misinformation that's given out there. Here it is, it's out there. Next week, we will have our public hearing. We're more than happy to listen to what, the public has to say regarding the recommendations. Again, recommendations that the Master Plan Committee gave to the town board. Again, it's out there, it's public now. We should have no, misinformation out there of what's going on out there. So I'm pretty sure they'll keep working. And like I said, next Wednesday at 7:30, this room will start the public hearing and we'll go from there. Thanks for coming tonight. Appreciate it. Have a good night.
Thank you.